Tonight on History Detectives.
These patches are just unidentifiable.
Whoa.
I want to know if that's a Lincoln signature.
This does not make sense.
Did my great-great-uncle bring these back from the Battle of Washita?
They're coming downstairs when disaster strikes.
Funding for tonight's presentation of History Detectives was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Wes Cowan. You know, the history of war is often told through memory and myth, personal stories, through scraps of fabric, letters home. Tonight, we investigate 4 mysteries of war that delve into family lore. Remnants of the battlefield, tonight on History Detectives.
My name is Mike McCune. I live over by the Barksdale Air Force Base. When I hear a plane flying over, I'll run outside. The sound of jet engines and bomber planes, it's just raw power. I have a brother named Jack. About 4 years ago, Jack was dumpster diving for cardboard boxes. What he found instead was a military-style footlocker. Inside was a whole stack of World War II paperwork. They all belonged to a World War II pilot named Lionel Potter. But what caught his eye were these. I'm pretty sure that these were patches that were worn by a bomber pilot. I posted pictures of them on a whole bunch of different military memorabilia sites. One guy emailed me saying that these patches are just unidentifiable. So what I want to know is what these patches are.
Wes Cowan here, reporting for duty. And I'm a sucker for World War II aviation. Whoa. Got a bird over a cloud dropping this egg with fins on it. I guess they're, you know, some sort of Air Force patches, right?
That would be my guess, definitely.
The service records found with the patches list Potter as a B-24 pilot with the 320th Squadron of the 90th Bombardment Group from 1942 to 1943. Where was he stationed?
Well, one of the places that he was stationed was New Guinea.
New Guinea was a front line in the Pacific War. So he got the Distinguished Flying Cross. Was it with the rest of this stuff?
No, it wasn't with it. It was just the patches in the papers.
Mike says Potter's medals appear to have come at a price.
After very severe combat service, 7 emergency landings in a row.
Present emotional status, abnormal, terror dreams, restlessness, tenseness. Wow. Mike wants to learn more about what Potter went through in New Guinea and whether these patches can help unlock that story. So this is not the insignia of the 320th Bomb Squadron?
No, those aren't.
Well, okay, who do they belong to?
You know, I would really like to find that out.
You know, the papers that were with these patches, I think, are just as interesting, if not more interesting than the patches themselves, because they tell something about the guy, Lionel Potter. It talks about his mental condition and physical condition after the war, and there's some really revealing stuff there. Whatever these patches symbolized, they sure didn't come off an assembly line. The beacon head don't come across very well, but this dark wing dropping this bomb through the clouds is clearly what is trying to be shown here. This story recalls one of the most personal investigations I've done for History Detectives. In 2008, I investigated a World War II diary written by another B-24 pilot, William Moran, who died in action. We reunited that diary with the daughter he never knew. I remember from that investigation that B-24s were known as flying coffins. They flew daylight raids over enemy territory, were hard to escape in an emergency, and had an appalling casualty rate. In the fall of 1942, nearly a year after Pearl Harbor, the first squadrons were dispatched to the Pacific Theater. The mission of the 90th Bomb Group? To slow the near-relentless Japanese advance towards Australia. Now, all the patches of the 90th Bomb Group are listed in this unit history. Their symbol was the Jolly Roger, but each of the squadrons had their own insignia. Potter's squadron, the 320th, wore the Moby Dick. But it's just as Mike reported. Our patches are nowhere in the record books. The one person who could tell me what these patches are and what he experienced in New Guinea is Potter himself. Here's a Lionel B. Potter, born 1917, died 1998. His last residence is listed in Riverside, California. That's where Mike's brother Jack found the footlocker. Got to be the same guy. But there's not much else here to go on. I'm going to need some help on trying to run down who he really was. While my office is looking for a family member, I'm meeting historian Chuck Clark. He studied the U.S. combat units which fought in New Guinea. I don't know if you've ever seen these patches or not.
I've not ever seen this particular patch, no. Just looking at the style of these, they look Second World War to me.
He says the patches are typical of how young air crews in World War II literally wore their pride.
Remember, the B-24 is an unpressurized bomber, so they wear these heavy jackets, and they put these patches on them so that when you're hanging out in the post bar or whatever, you're on Liberty, everybody can know what squadron you come from. It's really neat, by the way.
Chuck confirms the 90th Bombardment Group saw some of the fiercest fighting of the Pacific Theater, throwing themselves at the Japanese forces which menaced Australia.
One of their greatest successes was the so-called Battle of the Bismarck Sea, where they sunk several Japanese transports.
While it's not clear from the documents if Potter was in that attack, Chuck says the 25-year-old was certainly in the thick of the fighting. He notes that out of 46 missions that Potter flew, 26 were attacked by enemy planes. And then you come over here to his personality estimate, and present emotional status, abnormal, operational fatigue, mild under severity.
It looks like the way they've got it underlined here, friends or colleagues killed is the specific combat experience. He has the startle reaction, bad dreams, restlessness, and tenseness. They're just beginning to figure out what we would call PTSD, what they called combat fatigue or combat exhaustion.
Chuck explains that post-traumatic stress disorder, which Potter almost certainly had, leaves a complex and potentially long-lasting psychological scar. But during World War II, it was not so well understood.
The standard treatment for mild cases of combat fatigue was a shot of whiskey, a mild sedative, and 6 hours sleep at the battalion aid station. And then you go back in.
Oh, man, you're kidding me.
I'm
That's
not.
it? Although he at least partially recovered, he was one of the 1.3 million American soldiers who received treatment for battle fatigue during World War II, but who often found difficulty talking about their experiences.
For the most part, they come home, they talk to other veterans about it. They do not talk to civilians.
Chuck suggests another veteran might be able to help identify the patches and give us more information on what Potter encountered in the Pacific. Now 89, Wiley Woods is one of the last surviving veterans of the 90th Bombardment Group. We're meeting at the Commemorative Air Force Museum in Addison, Texas. Wiley was a navigator in the 320th Squadron. He didn't know Potter, but he confirms that his fellow airmen had flown into a nightmare of hot steel and violence.
Potter came at a very bad time because the Japanese had air superiority, and the 320th Squadron usually was intercepted every time they went on a mission.
Wiley explains that mission after mission, Potter and his fellow airmen climbed into the B-24s knowing that the Japanese Zeros would attack. And mission after mission, they were attacked, but refused to back down, flying deep over enemy territory despite shocking casualty rates.
The Japanese were very good flyers, no question about it. And, of course, we suffered some losses.
They must have been scared witless, weren't they?
Well, you learned to live with it. I mean, you had learned to accept whatever was in store. You had no other choice.
These patches were in his effects, and do you recognize what bomb group those are from?
No, It was not the squadron patch of Lionel Potter.
What did that look like?
I'll show you. Now that is the 320th patch.
Now, why'd they call it Moby Dick?
Well, the crew had been very successful in sinking Japanese ships, so they felt that that would be appropriate for their airplane.
It's the same design I saw earlier, but something about it catches my eye. When you look at these two patches, the coloration and the pattern is identical.
It certainly is.
These patches look to me like they were made at the same place.
Most of them were made in Australia.
Wiley says when the 90th went on leave, they hired locals to embroider their designs. The patches are handmade and similar, but I still don't know what my patch represents. Time to check in with the office.
Hey, Wes.
What do you got for me?
Good news. I found Lionel Potter's son, Bruce, and I'm going to have him meet you at the Veterans Memorial in Birmingham.
I'm on my way. Bruce Potter is the second of Lionel's three sons. Growing up, Bruce often wondered about his dad's war experiences. What did your dad tell you about the war?
Actually, he didn't like to talk much about it. Every time I mentioned it to him, he kind of pushed it aside. It was pretty traumatic for him.
After Lionel Potter died, Bruce found his father's diary and came face to face with a part of his father he never knew. January 10th, 11th, and 12th, 1943. It's amazing how you can go out and kill a couple hundred men and perhaps have a few of yours missing or killed and come back, sit down, and relax at a rubber of bridge.
It's heavy stuff.
That's very heavy. Yeah. Potter had been eyewitness to the grisly aftermath of the famous Battle of the Bismarck Sea, where Japanese destroyers and troop transports were sunk by American bombers and PT attack boats. March 5th, 1943. The PT boats, having polished off the damaged ships, were touring at high speeds through the Jap landing force, having a great time strafing and throwing hand grenades into the crowded Japanese lifeboats. It's a shocking detail, a glimpse of the appalling violence that Potter witnessed and lived through. Wow. It's all about becoming inured or used to death. Bruce shows me another entry that haunts him, as it did his father. September 28th, 1943. What I'm about to describe will long live in my memory. After turning off our bomb run, we were jumped by 6 Zeros who were really eager to add a B-24 to their trophy room. Mine. One pass knocked the left waist gun out of commission. Another pass caused a 20mm to explode in the tail turret, which was already injured. I saw this Silver Zero come right straight at me with wings smoking. The bullet went through the fuse box 2 inches anywhere but lower, and your author would have been a regrettable casualty. The diary is an extraordinary document and answers my question about Potter's combat service. I want to show you this stuff I think you're going to be very interested in. But what about the patches?
Oh. I never thought I'd see these again.
Bruce says the patches and documents had been in his house growing up, but went missing possibly during a move. He'd never had a chance to study the records. These are not officially recognized by the Air Force as the insignia of the 320th Bomb Squad. Did your dad ever write about them at all?
No, he never wrote about them, but I do know what they are.
You know, it's a great story for me. I love World War II history. I tell Mike how Potter had made his way back, literally and also psychologically, from some of the bloodiest fighting of the Pacific Theater. Like Mike, I'd struggled with the mystery of the bomb-dropping bird. So the real question is, what are these patches?
It's been killing me for all this time.
Mike doesn't know it, but Bruce Potter is about to solve his mystery.
I mean, if I could find out what these patches in the bomb group and squadron that they belong to.
Looks kind of familiar.
Hey, that's the same patch. Wow, that is unreal.
I'm Bruce Potter. I'm his son.
Oh, my God. Nice to meet you.
You too, sir. This is a patch that I had from my dad that I went ahead and had sewed up on a leather vest for my motorcycle riding. That's the 320th Bomb Squadron patch that my dad and his crews came up with for their group of bomber pilots.
Bruce doesn't know how many of the patches were actually made, but believes his father had them created for his fellow crew members. They'd not been part of the recorded history of the 320th Squadron until now.
So they designed this patch?
They did.
What do you think of this?
That looks like an original little drawing of the patch.
Now we know that what he was really drawing was a bald eagle, and it didn't quite come out on the patches here.
I could never figure out that bird. You know, I have to say one thing is, these belong to your dad. So, you know, with my honor, I'd like to present it all back to you.
Well, how about we do this? How about you keep one, I keep one?
That'd be awesome.
Okay.
Coming up, were these artifacts stripped from a fallen chief at the famous Battle of the Washita? And later, is this a remnant from one of the first bloody encounters of the Civil War? But first...
I'm Muriel Versaghi, curator of the Royal Oak Historical Society Museum in Royal Oak, Michigan. A few years ago, our museum received a large donation from a local family. We found this scrap of paper in an envelope with several other documents. It reads, Sergeant John S. Ennis, named within, take the oath of December 8th and be discharged. Signed A. Lincoln, January 16th, 1864. Who is Sergeant John Ennis, and why was it signed by Abraham Lincoln?
Hello, how are you?
I am good.
And what is this document about?
It's a discharge for Sergeant John Ennis, signed by A. Lincoln.
You think this was a soldier in the Union Army, and Lincoln was somehow giving him an honorable discharge or something?
Personally.
You do notice there's writing on the back of this.
That's what led us to believe that it's real, because a theory, lots of theories. Paper was very scarce, I'm thinking, in the war.
January 16th, 1864.
Right.
You do recognize that Abraham Lincoln was the president of the United States at that point.
Oh, yes, indeed.
Why do you think the president of the United States is going to be writing on scrap paper?
That's what I want you to find out. I want to know, we at the museum want to know if that's a real Lincoln signature. And who is Sergeant John Ennis? Who is he?
I'm going to do my best to find out if this is, in fact, a Lincoln signature on scrap paper.
I know.
January 16, 1864. Abraham Lincoln is trying to keep the Union together. He's already issued the Emancipation Proclamation, and just a few days before this date, January 16th, the 13th Amendment has been introduced into Congress.
In the thick of war and wrestling with the most divisive issue of his day, would this document really have crossed the president's desk?
The question is, why is Abraham Lincoln, if he signed this, discharging this particular individual who has taken some kind of oath?
And the size of the document is just plain odd.
It looks too little to be official. Come on. Let me call the office.
This is Robin.
Did you find out anything about a Sergeant John S. Ennis?
I think I found your guy.
Researcher Robin Hutchins tells me that John Ennis was a flesh and blood soldier, but not what Muriel thought. He was a Confederate, not a Union soldier, and his rank was private, not sergeant.
He's from Warren County, Kentucky, a son of a wealthy family, and at around age 18, he joined the Confederate unit.
In 1863, a Private Ennis of the Kentucky 3rd Cavalry had been captured and imprisoned. And the oath of December 8th that Muriel's note refers to was an 1863 proclamation. It gave some Confederate sympathizers the opportunity to switch sides.
It would allow individuals who had political allegiance to the Confederacy to now take an oath of allegiance to the Union and receive amnesty.
But Lincoln excluded Confederate prisoners of war from taking this oath. Private Ennis was a prisoner of war, so why would the president have intervened because one lowly rebel soldier wanted to go home? I'm meeting with Dr. James Cornelius, He's curator of the Lincoln Collection in Springfield, Illinois.
This is what I have.
Let me have a look. There's something else on the back.
And what is the President of the United States doing using scrap paper? I mean, was there a paper shortage because of the war? Just something, this does not make sense.
James takes me to the library's conservation lab to authenticate the signature.
Well, the first thing we notice is that the ink is a nice kind of chocolate brown color. Iron gall ink. It fades. It's darker in some places. It's lighter in other places. We also,
so that's good. Iron gall ink was used, and that's period.
Next, James shows me something from their collection, an authenticated letter from the president to an Illinois senator.
So this is a known signature.
It certainly looks a lot like ours. Then he produces another, longer letter signed A. Lincoln.
His ink is good, his paper is good.
Okay.
The only problem, this third letter is a known fake.
This was made in the 1930s, we think.
This was made in the 1930s.
Yeah.
The forged signature is similar to ours, but James can't tell exactly what we have. He explains that Lincoln forgeries began to appear almost immediately after his death. Prices for the real thing motivate forgers today.
$2,000, $3,000 for just a piece of paper that only has his signature on it. On up to a big full letter, maybe 100 words, depending on the subject, that could be worth 20, 40, 60,000. The problem with this big forgery is more in his wording. He didn't understand the way Lincoln thought and wrote.
So where does that put me with ours? Is this an authentic Abraham Lincoln signature?
Let's flip it over once. Remember, there's funny stuff on the back.
Yes.
James explains that sometimes the key to authenticating a signature is the content of the document and its context. Is it accurate? And can it be backed up by other information? In this case, he explains that if a Confederate sympathizer was prepared to renounce his loyalty, he would often have someone write a letter to Washington, D.C. on his behalf.
Well, you remember how it says John S. Ennis, named within.
Right.
Okay, within another letter. A letter, we guess, to Mr. Lincoln. That, we think, is what's on the other side.
But is there any other evidence that someone might have written to the president on Private Ennis's behalf? James has made a discovery.
This is a list of people who petitioned to be released from Camp Douglas. Fourth from the end. Ennis, J-N-O, he's in the 3rd Kentucky Cavalry. He wants to get out. Who petitioned to get him out? Honorable H. Grider. That's Congressman Henry Grider.
Lincoln had ordered that Confederate prisoners could not take the oath, but James says he made exceptions, especially if the petitioner was a powerful congressman from his own state.
Henry Grider is the link between a little private, a 19-year-old kid, nobody's ever heard of him, and the President of the United States.
Did Private Ennis go free? Or was this letter like the other forgery, a clever hoax?
Show you one other thing here.
So first of all, let me just start by saying John S. Ennis was not in the Union Army. In fact, he was a private. He was a Confederate soldier.
Okay, that blows that theory.
I explained that James said in a world of skillful Lincoln forgeries, authenticating a signature sometimes depends on the content and context of the document.
Show you one other thing here. He was discharged.
Wow.
John Ennis signs the oath of loyalty. That's the clincher. Lincoln actually signed it. Word goes out through the military, by the telegraph to Chicago. 3 days later, the boy is free. This is the real thing.
Oh, my God.
You have in your hands an authentic signature from President Abraham Lincoln.
Really?
There was one other thing. Why had the letter been so fragmented?
You said earlier, Lincoln didn't have a paper shortage.
Right. So
He didn't use scraps. He didn't need to.
Right. So what's going on?
Souveniring. Somebody cut these off of whole documents out of the War Department files. Here's another one. Look, it's even smaller than yours. That's a Lincoln signature.
Okay.
And on the back of it, upside down in this case, yours is sideways, is somebody else's letter.
Right. Abraham Lincoln did not suffer from a lack of paper.
For us, this little piece of paper will be the most important thing in our collection. This little scrap. Wow. Oh, jeez. Thank you so much.
My name is George Bryson. About 60 years ago, my grandmother, whom we called Muzzy, gave me several Indian relics. These leggings and breastplate have been to every show and tell of my two sisters and my children.
I know they're very special.
And in fact, I hate to admit it, but I did wear these to class one time when I was probably 10 years old. The story goes, in our family, my great-great-uncle Taylor took these from an Indian chief by the name of Black Kettle at the Battle of Washita in Oklahoma in November 1868. I would like to learn, did he actually bring these back from Chief Black Kettle?
I'm on my way to see this guy, George, who's got an ancestor who supposedly was in the 7th Cavalry. Not many relics survived the Battle of the Washita, also known as the Washita Massacre. To have items from Black Kettle himself would be almost too good to be true. I got to tell you, it sounds like a pretty far-fetched story to me, and this may be a dry hole.
You know, when you're young, this is all very intriguing. If you would look at what we call our breastplate, the front of it it looks like 4 birds that you're looking down on with their heads, and it's, I think, kind of a very neat etching on it. But the back tells a whole different story.
Okay. Oh, wow. Those were what I would call pictographs.
Okay.
Some people would call this as a gorget or a pectoral. It's meant to be worn, you know, on the front of the body.
Both Muzz and my mother felt that we shouldn't have these. My mother wouldn't look at them. She felt that they needed to be in the grave.
Were there other things that got, you know, passed along?
Discharge papers for my great-great-uncle Taylor, signed by General Custer.
I can tell you definitely that is George Armstrong Custer's signature. No question about that. You know, the Battle of the Washita, of course, was a huge, pivotal moment in the Indian Wars. And it was a big deal for Custer, too. Custer's scorched earth assault on a large village filled with sleeping women and children, and the killing of a leader regarded as a peacemaker, only added to his controversial reputation. It was a blow from which the Southern Cheyenne would never recover. It looks like he was in Company A of the 7th Cavalry, enlisted for 5 years. He got out after 3 years, so something must have happened.
The story passed on was that he had been shot in the eye with an arrow and subsequently was discharged.
Wow.
So my question, quite simply, is what do we have here?
Well, if we can tie these to Black Kettle at all, they're pretty significant things. Both of these artifacts are in really great shape. Leggings were worn by chiefs, but they were also standard dress for other members of the tribe. I have a quick test to confirm that they're from the correct era. See the white thread here? By the late 1800s, cotton thread was being made with more industrial methods, using acids and other chemicals. If the thread glows brightly under a black light, then it likely dates from later than the Battle of the Washita. Yeah, not really flashing too bright, so this is probably from the 1800s, but to confirm, I'm going to get the dye tested. So I want to take just a little snippet of this red cloth. However, there's a more fundamental problem with the leggings. Black Kettle was Southern Cheyenne. Based upon my experience with American Indian material, these are not Cheyenne leggings. Cheyenne used buckskin or leather, and they're beaded with very distinctive rows of triangles on the outside. And this style of legging was made by prairie Indians, the Osage, the Kaw. Now, the gorget brings me a little closer to black kettle. Southern Cheyenne men did wear these. It's made out of a metal called German silver. It's not really silver. It has a very high nickel content. It was the kind of silver that was used by traders to sell to American Indians. The front is engraved with geometric designs and arrows, but the back is different. There is a pictographic figure of a man with braids, flanked by two other figures, a rearing pony or horse, and then what I think may be quivers or maybe other figures, but a story is being told here. So far, I have a lot of story, but nothing here puts these artifacts or Taylor even near Black Kettle or the Battle of the Washita. I'm at the Oklahoma History Center, and I'm going to be visiting with a guy named Jerry Green. Jerry is the author of Washita, the definitive account of the engagement.
Come on, Wes, we'll take a look at this stuff right here.
Terrific. As we unwrap the artifacts, Jerry describes the powder keg of tension waiting to explode that winter of 1868. Black Kettle believed the tide of European settlers rolling over the plains could not be stopped. But many of his own warriors resisted his counsel that the tribe head south to reservations in Indian Territory, or what is today Oklahoma.
The Cheyennes and the Arapahoes, not all of them wanted to go on the reservation. They didn't want to leave the hunting grounds in western Kansas where the buffalo roamed.
Cheyenne warriors raided settlers. General Philip Sheridan ordered an attack in winter when the tribes thought they were safe.
The purpose was to destroy not only the people, but to destroy anything that would have to do with their ability to make war and to attack whites.
Okay, there are the leggings. Now, I know that these are not Cheyenne leggings. These, in fact, are probably Osage leggings.
Well, of course, Custer's scouts were Osages, so there's a connection right there with the leggings.
So George's great-great-uncle could have gotten them from one of the Osage scouts riding with Custer.
And what about this item?
Well, and you can see the engraving on the top. What's really neat about this, though, is what's on the back. I just want you to take a look at that. Jerry immediately makes a connection.
Well, it reminds me of that picture of Black Kettle at Camp Weld.
Jerry shows me the picture in his book, one of two known images of Black Kettle.
Looks like that's our man. That's amazing.
I tell Jerry the items may have been taken from Black Kettle at Washita by one of Custer's men named William Taylor. This discharge is dated June 4th, 1869.
And he's discharged from the Army in consequence of Special Order number 125. Special orders pertain to individuals. For example, men with disabilities often got special orders.
You know, that's really interesting because Taylor, he was actually wounded in the eye with an arrow.
My gosh.
Jerry's book includes all the Washita casualties on both sides.
Here is a list of some 15 men who were wounded at the Washita. And, well, you know, I don't see Taylor's name on here. I don't believe that if the man was wounded in the eye by an arrow, that he would have avoided being put on this list.
Yeah, and I would think if he was wounded in the eye with an arrow, he would be on the deceased list.
I think he might be the first on the list.
In the meantime, I get the results back from the lab. What'd you find out?
No synthetic dyes. We put a 1850 or earlier date of manufacture on them.
Fantastic. I knew that was going to be the case. The dye in the leggings dates to the mid-1800s, so the artifacts are period, but where did they come from? I've got to find out if my guy Taylor was even at the Battle of the Washita. And what better place to find that out than at the battlefield itself, so I'm on my way. Joel Shockley is a park guide at the Washita Battlefield National Historic Site. He has access to the official roster of who was there that day, and he's made a discovery.
We have on the muster row of the time of the fight. And if you look at the very bottom, you will see Taylor, William H., Corporal, August 17th, 1866, from Philadelphia.
So he was actually here.
He was actually here. He was also with the sharpshooters. Sharpshooters. They were the
Black Kettle's village is over here, on
Right.
this side of the river.
On this side of the river.
Custer's men are over here.
Right.
And his wife reached the river.
As they're crossing the river, he is shot. And the bullet goes through him and through his wife. The second shot, they fall into the water.
Within 20 minutes, the village is overrun by Custer's troopers.
He starts destroying the village. He starts having these men pull down the lodges and build big, huge bonfires and throw them on there.
There's plenty of time to collect souvenirs. They torch the teepees and then spend hours killing hundreds of ponies. Even if Black Kettle was not wearing the gorget, Joel says it could have easily been taken from the encampment. Chief Gordon Yellowman teaches Cheyenne and Arapaho language and is descended from a long line of Cheyenne chiefs. He says the Cheyenne see Ouachita as hallowed ground.
You know, was it a battle? Was it a massacre? For the Cheyennes, we say massacre, and for the soldiers and the Europeans, they say battle. So in order for us to accept really the atrocity that did occur, then we have to educate one another.
To honor the significance of the artifacts, Chief Yellowman puts on his war bonnet.
It's out of respect for Matabato, Black Kettle as a chief. And out of respect for that, I just kind of want to use my stick to honor the spirit of these items that have a spiritual connection.
He agrees the leggings are not Cheyenne, but the gorget is, and often signified a person of high status.
When the sun reflected off of this, it acted as a mirror. It radiated. This is a person of leadership.
Right.
You have the four directions. So these signify arrows. They're coming together as a unified nation.
What I really want your opinion about, though, is on the back. I tell George that his great-great-uncle may have been a witness to Black Kettle's death. The sharpshooters were stationed along one bank of the Ouachita River, and their job was, as Indians were starting to leave the camp, to take care of the problem. We don't know the details of what George's relatives saw or did that day. The leggings were almost certainly not Black Kettle's, but could have belonged to one of Custer's Osage scouts. And Chief Yellowman had some strong ideas about the metal ornament.
And so this part here is definitely reflecting a man. Then here on the leggings, you have the man design, which is the mountains. Would have been white background. And it could have been, I'm saying it's probably a chief blanket. And here you have Black Kettle.
Although he couldn't be sure, the chief thought the gorget could have been worn by Black Kettle. What he is certain of is its connection to the Cheyenne people.
Oh, my gosh. Wow.
I tell George that Chief Yellowman had been deeply affected, seeing items from a history that remained painful for his people.
These things have energy of that time. And when we talk of them today, it empowers and radiates that energy. It brings it back. I would have a ritual done with them, a personal Cheyenne ritual, a blessing to end a lot of that hatred.
My children are already talking about going out to see it. So maybe that's something we could do.
I think that it would be a pretty powerful thing.
Contact the chief.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of boxes at my house, and my daughter Jill here kind of pushed me to go through them. One of the things I found was this envelope, and it said, Pop's Letters of the Civil War and Relics. And there was this piece of fabric that didn't look like anything.
One of the letters had said, Succession Rag, Marshall House, Colonel's Blood. So I found out that Colonel Ellsworth died taking this Confederate flag down from the Marshall House Inn in Virginia in the start of the war. It was quite a big deal, this death.
Colonel Ellsworth was the first officer killed in the Civil War. So we thought, let's call the history detectives.
We want to know, do we have a piece of American history? Do we?
I'm Gwendolyn Wright, and today I'm investigating a small piece of cloth that may connect to the very beginning of the Civil War.
There it is.
Oh, it is tiny. What did you make of it when you first saw it?
I thought it was weird. I mean, it's like, why is a red piece of fabric in there? And then Jill, who's the genealogist in our family, she started researching it. And we had some letters that my great-grandfather wrote to his parents.
Gail's great-grandfather was a Union soldier named Ira Wilson.
That is Ira.
Very distinguished man. What did he do?
He was actually a hat block maker. He carved wood so people could make hats.
Can you pull out the letter? Do you have that one?
Yes, it's right here. It says, I sent you a piece of the secession rag, it says rag, that the colonel took down from the Marshall House, but I forgot to tell you of it in my last. Keep it for me as a relic of the war.
Jill learned the Marshall House was a hotel in Alexandria, Virginia, which in the spring of 1861 had celebrated secession by raising a huge flag.
So it's possible that the secession rag was just a derogatory way of speaking about a Confederate flag.
Right, enemy flag.
I'm looking forward to learning more about your great-great-grandfather and possibly having this give some insights into the beginnings of the Civil War. It would be exciting if this was a piece of the Marshall House flag, but there's some reasons to be skeptical. First, it's tiny, and it may be very difficult to get much information from something that's barely an inch square. The color seems very bright for something that's 150 years old.
Ira's letters are from May and June 1861, and already give a sense of wartime shortages. He asks for a revolver, shoes, socks, and $1 or $2 for provisions. The letters aren't complete. Some pages are missing.
Well, several places he mentions Alexandria, and I know that was the site of the Marshall House. He also mentions Colonel Ellsworth several times. Now, here's the crucial part. He tells his parents that he has sent them a piece of the secession rag that the colonel took down from the Marshall House.
But that letter appears to be missing its first page. I don't see a date or any details on how he got that piece of the flag. I've received Ira's service records from the office.
Ira Wilson, age 21 years. April 20th, 1861, at New York City, he enlisted in Ellsworth's 11th Infantry. Wounded and captured at the First Battle of Bull Run, then mustered out on May 24th, 1862.
Colonel Ellsworth was killed on May 24th, 1861.
So Ira was captured 2 months after the flag was removed from the Marshall House Inn. With no gaps in his enlistment, he was in Ellsworth Regiment when the flag was removed.
Adam Goodhart's best-selling book, 1861, details the Marshall House incident.
Now, this had belonged to a man named Ira Wilson, who sent this fragment and a number of letters back to his family. The letters wrote glowingly of Colonel Ellsworth. Tell me more about Ellsworth.
Ellsworth was almost like a 19th century rock star even before the Civil War began. He had come seemingly from out of nowhere, a very poor background, ended up in Chicago working as a shop clerk, but became fascinated with the military.
Adam explains how Ellsworth formed a touring drill unit called the Fire Zouaves. Before the Civil War, all fire departments in the U.S. were volunteer companies, and some of them also engaged in military drill. The Zouaves were known for ornate uniforms and parade routines that wowed crowds. One performance caught the eye of a future president.
Well, the last stop on this nationwide Zouave tour was Springfield, Illinois, Lincoln's town. And Abraham Lincoln, that summer as he's running for president, comes down to the town square in Springfield, watches the Zouaves perform, and becomes entranced with Ellsworth. It was almost this immediate connection between these two extraordinary men. Ellsworth becomes almost a member of the Lincoln family.
Ellsworth worked enthusiastically on Lincoln's campaign trail and also served him as a legal clerk.
Various people said that Lincoln loved him like a younger brother. And when Lincoln is elected and travels to Washington, D.C. in early 1861, Ellsworth accompanies the Lincoln family.
Have you seen pieces of the flag before?
I have. This piece actually looks a little bit more red than some of the other pieces out there. It can be very hard to tell whether a particular piece of fabric came from a specific flag.
The original Marshall House Inn was torn down in the 1950s. But the Gadsby Tavern in Alexandria is almost an exact replica.
3 stories high, that was a relatively large building for the time.
And at 24 feet wide, Adams says the massive flag was almost as big as the structure.
It was, and so you can imagine why this wide flag was visible, apparently even from Washington, D.C., and Ellsworth had looked at it from the window of the second floor of the White House through a spyglass and seen this sort of mocking the Union forces from across the Potomac River in the Confederacy.
Adam explains how Ellsworth and his men wanted to remove the offending flag from the view of the White House, convinced this would please the president.
Ellsworth goes up to the roof and opens a trap door to cut down the huge Confederate flag.
The flag vanishes from the skyline. In Alexandria, at least one man was looking for revenge and blood.
Ellsworth has cut the flag down. They're coming downstairs, and they reach a point just at the first landing when disaster strikes. A door swings open, and out from behind it steps a man named James W. Jackson, the innkeeper who owned the Marshall House Hotel. He's also an ardent secessionist, and he points a shotgun at Ellsworth at point-blank range, pulls the trigger, and almost immediately Ellsworth's chest is ripped open. He's dead before he hits the ground. And almost in the same instant, one of the corporals, a man named Francis Brownell, Union corporal accompanying Ellsworth, turns his gun to James Jackson, the killer, fires point-blank into his face, bayonets him in the chest, and almost in the same instant, the killer has fallen dead alongside the fallen Colonel Ellsworth.
Just over a month after the initial battle shots of the Civil War were fired at Fort Sumter, Ellsworth's death marked the first Union officer killed on duty. The event quickly became a media sensation, inflaming passions on each side. Both men, Ellsworth and Jackson, were mourned as martyrs. In Virginia, Jackson, at least, is still remembered.
Oh, here's the plaque.
That's it.
The Marshall House. James Jackson was killed, the first martyr to the cause of Southern independence.
Isn't that amazing? And underneath it says the justice of history does not permit his name to be forgotten. Now, of course, we know that Ellsworth's name, at least on this plaque, is forgotten.
How could Ira have gotten a piece of this flag? Textile conservator Sarah Stevens has an answer. Sarah works for the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, where the flag is housed.
So we have it set up here.
One look tells the story.
Ah, it is huge. There are large pieces that are going.
These large cutout areas are from souveniring, especially the diagonal ones that are very clean cut.
Sarah explains how the blood-soaked flag was seized by Ellsworth soldiers and eventually accompanied the colonel's body back to New York, but not before his men cut pieces of the flag as relics of their fallen leader's bravery. Sarah says about 40% of the flag is missing.
Are there any bloodstains still on the flag?
Yes, we have 2 small stains. There's one over here on this star that's very easy to see in the white.
Oh, yes.
And we tested that. And then there's one down here, which is pretty difficult to see because it's red on red.
Sarah tells me the enormous flag had been made from bunting by a local sailmaker.
Bunting in the 19th century was a lightweight wool fabric, and it flies in the breeze very well. So when you make a large-size flag like this, you want it of lightweight material so that it'll fly.
So here's our piece.
Ooh, so small.
The color of red of our fragment is somewhat different from the red of the flag. Does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't. You know, they haven't been together for the last 150 years, so the light exposure would have been different, and that would affect the color.
Is this flag too small for you to make a match and see if it's made with the same material?
No, we'll be able to put that under the stereo microscope and take a closer look.
Sarah magnifies the weave by 150%.
There's the Marshall House flag, and then this is the fragment. And so they're at the same magnification. And we start looking at the yarns and the yarn structure and spin. There's two ways you can spin a yarn, in the Z direction or the S direction.
Z means that the fibers are pulled from upper right to bottom left.
And these are in the Z direction, and we can see that in the yarns.
Next, was the yarn in our fragment woven in the same way?
The yarns go over and then under and then over again, every other yarns. And then, so here it is, over and then under, over and under.
But the real test is the fabric's density.
And then so we'll also count how many warp and wefts per inch there are.
Well, first of all, let me tell you a little bit about Ira that you may not know. He was 21 when he enlisted with 1,000 men in Ellsworth's New York fire Zouaves. Those young men, Ira among them, probably would have followed him anywhere. I know you wanted to find out if this object was, in fact, part of the Marshall House flag.
We count yarns per inch, and we did that for these specimens, and these are very similar, 30 yarns per inch.
So what do we have? What have we proved?
Well, you do have letters that say he sent something home, and it mentions the flag specifically.
The two samples are identical, and the family letters connect them like a thread.
Because you have this documentation, it's most likely the Marshall House flag itself.
It's wonderful. Very, very cool.
That's been a wonderful journey. I would like to have the letter and the flag, have it, preserve it now that we know what it is. I mean, it lived 150 years in a little white envelope with nobody knowing, so now we ought to give it 150 years of everybody knowing. So we will take care of what we have.
Funding for tonight's presentation of History Detectives was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.